Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu.
Namaste.
We continue with the subject of the last time, food in connection with nature. There's a lot to be said about it.
Yes. And I thought this time to approach from a different perspective. Last time we dwelt on the huge poisoning of the food system and the interventions which on one side are trying to improve but in fact end up worsening because we make food grow faster but then nutritionally it drops. We spoke also of how poisons have been pumped into the soil of Punjab, making Punjab today the cancer capital of India. There's something unique in the whole world, which is something they call the cancer train in Punjab. So every day there's a train full of cancer patients which shuttles between 3 cities for treatment. Nowhere in the world you see this kind of phenomenon.
We also spoke about people who are trying to reverse this trend.
Yes, and
Very
the shift
important.
to organic agriculture.
Yes, exactly.
But also that it will take time you cannot remove from the soil the toxicity, and it's going to be a longer process. But all of this I wanted to put in a larger context, for which we will step back and look at the whole earth as one living being. In his commentary on the Isha Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo introduces this very interesting concept. You see, the Isha Upanishad speaks of all this as being for the habitation of the Lord. Whatsoever is universe within the universe. And so the suggestion straight away is that every unit, every piece, every object is an entire universe in itself, is the divine wholly representing itself with an aspect. But the point Sri Aurobindo brings is that while the flower is the whole divine represented as flower, the plant is the whole divine as plant, the mountain is whole divine as mountain, there is a relationship that the divine as flower sets with divine as plant. And it is a relationship of container and contained. Similarly, a relationship between plant and mountain, where plant is put as contained in mountain. And because of this relationship, that which is contained feels itself as if a product of the container. This is a very important idea, because when you begin to look at it, the world from this perspective, you realize that although the flower has an independent existence of its own, the particular substantiality and the quality it expresses or the form it has is deeply connected to the container out of which it emerges. And this is important to see because we as human beings are emerging from the container that is planet Earth. If we had taken birth on another planet, let's say Mars, and yes, life can exist on Mars, does exist on Mars, as well as on Venus. Maybe we have touched upon it, but just to further amplify the idea, there are portions of Mars where you have permanent ice, frozen ice, 68 kilometers in diameter to a 4 kilometers deep lake of frozen ice, of course frozen on top with liquid water below, is one of the pictures recently released by NASA. And so if you have permanent ice anywhere, and obviously some part of it is liquid, then you're close enough in temperature to be able to live, even if the rest is more hot. So Venus is too hot near equators, but at the poles it's permanent ice. In between there's a temperate region where we can live. And of course there are beings living there also. And so wherever you may be as human beings, with whatever assisted, let's say for oxygenation, assisted suits, you will tend to then acquire the character of the planet or that particular part of nature in which you are growing. So if you grow plants on Venus or Mars and you eat from them, that material substance will eventually become the substance of your body. And while minerals are common, because that's the nature of the physical matter everywhere across all planets, still there's a vibrational quality to each planet which is distinct. So if you take the analogy of the human being, we are not just our physical body. We have equally a vital body and a mental body, and even intermediate gradations, including what Mother speaks of as the subtle physical. And this is the same with every planet. A planet has its own vital body and its mental body, its own subtle physical body. There is even a material which is very close to the physical, which rightly is called ether or etheric in nature. And each planet has its own dense etheric layer, which is the layer that converts the sunlight entering into warmth. And Earth's etheric layer, for example, extends a little beyond the moon, and because the moon is inside the etheric layer, it remains tidally locked with one side facing the Earth. Otherwise, scientists don't have an explanation of why this should be so. The moon should be spinning. But what keeps it locked? They just use the word tidal lock, but it explains nothing. It's because it is held in the etheric layer which is turning with the Earth that you do not experience a movement internally. Now all of this material, the etheric layer and the vital body and the mental body of the Earth, and even a spiritual soul and, let's say, fine body, all of this has gone in nourishing the human being and of course all life on Earth. The substantiality of plants on Earth, the animal tissue and human body have been formed out of this material of the Earth with this particular vibrational quality, and we are therefore as if intimately a part of the Earth nature, literally physical Earth nature. And if you were to grow up on Venus or Mars, you would have had a strong imprint of the Mars vitality, Mars mentality, and even the aspect of the spiritual consciousness that is unique to the being that is planet Mars.
I wanted to go back just a moment because there was a quote from Sri Aurobindo that has touched me so deeply, and it was in a letter to Dilip Kumar Roy, where he says, "The earth is a conscious being, and the world is only the form it takes to manifest."
Exactly, yes. Yes. And if you take this statement through to its conclusion, it means long before the physical form of the earth as a planetary body developed, there was the conscious being which assembled around it the material that became the earth planet. And because the material it assembled was an expression of its consciousness, the planet has this quality and character. And it's not by chance that the earth has 3/4 water, on the land surface at least. And it's not by chance that the human body is 3/4 volume of water. It's as if our body is a representation of the earth. It's not by chance that our blood content and proportion of minerals matches practically an exact replica of the ocean water, except that the salt is slightly more in the ocean, slightly more, and we have red blood cells. But if you remove red blood cells, remove a little bit of the salt from the ocean, you could inject it directly. We are literally ocean, and the proportion in the body, 3/4 in volume is 3/4 on surface. It's not by chance, this resonance. Equally, our lung size proportional to, okay, it's interesting. If you count the number of molecules of air inside the human lungs, that number is the lungfuls of air that the totality of Earth atmosphere holds. Meaning for every lungful of air out there, there's one molecule of air within. So, the way people place it, pick whoever is your hero or your person model. That person, in his last breath, breathes out the lungful of air, and when this spreads out completely into the earth, every lungful of air that you breathe has one molecule that he breathed out. Think of it like that. Because that's the exact proportion in which it matches. Now these are not by chance, because the human body is literally formed to represent earth consciousness. And The plants, therefore, and their tissue, and their even genetic structure and particular balance, and I'm not speaking only of the physical genetic component, but the vital content, are perfectly attuned to the human. And this is the point I want to bring in as far as food is concerned. Our body growing up on the physical earth, representing the physical earth consciousness, is in perfect alignment to the forms of fruits, vegetables, plants, which nature has grown, which are also expression of her consciousness, and the two are in perfect alignment. This makes it that the food we eat is perfectly tuned to our body's requirement.
But then we have altered genetic modification in
point.
DNA.
That's the point.
This is the problem.
Now when you start toying with the balance at a genetic level, or intervening to twist certain things as an experiment, you might shift them out of alignment. And that food will no more be compatible with your energetic body, not just the physical genetic, but even the energetic grade.
But nature in her evolution also modifies
Yes.
and changes
Yes.
things.
But always keeping in harmony with the overall balance.
Right.
So if the human need grows, the plants and animals also are in proportion in alignment. And there's a bit of a spectrum for variation. But when we make a sharp change, it's as if you're introducing an alien DNA. At that point, are you compatible anymore? And that's the question one would ask. And I mean not only in the physical DNA content, but in the energetic equivalent of DNA, what would we call it? Energy, let's say particles, whether we are still in alignment. And this is an important question or important perspective in which to view it. On Earth, for example, there's something, even the magnetic field of the Earth, in the electric field of the Earth, there are certain resonances. There's a particular resonance called the Schumann resonance, which is, I think, 7.8 times per second that there's a resonance. And our human body is as if attuned to that. When astronauts leave physical Earth's close proximity and go far enough, they are out of the Schumann resonance. And it changes somehow their life energy pattern. If you go very far, then it's as if the nourishing supply of life force which we are receiving from the physical earth, that thread weakens, thins, and as if your body begins to deplete life force. Unless you find other ways of regenerating or carrying a ball of life energy in your spaceship or creating it in the spaceship.
Many of the astronauts have had extraordinary experiences.
Yes.
How has it affected their bodies?
Well, it affected their minds fundamentally. Just being out there in the aura of the earth and seeing the whole earth as one being. Physically, you're seeing the physical site of earth as one ball, but on a deeper level, you're tuned into the subtle body and even the spiritual consciousness of the earth, and you see her as a conscious being. And that's what changes you permanently. And they all came back with a completely different view and understanding, sometimes with the consciousness so changed that they could never be the same. One of them, in fact, Edgar Mitchell, started this Institute of Noetic Sciences, which I referred to last time, with the intention of exploring the deeper human potential and the parapsychological phenomena and consciousness and matter relationships and so on. But the point I was getting to, if you were to now go out in a spaceship at a sufficiently great distance, if you did not carry with you the equivalent of Earth's vital body, mental body, and energetic, let's say, ball of content, your body would very quickly deplete. Because our body is constantly drawing in this material from our physical earth. And while out there you can draw from universal energy of the vital and mental, it would not be the same as this particular nourishing space. It's very similar to a little baby that needs to be close to its mother's arms in order to absorb from its mother something of the subtle physical and vital energy, which is its direct nourishment first. And if you have the child grow far away from human contact of any kind, then these higher grades of consciousness and their bodies don't develop sufficiently, and they're often very close to animal level. So there's something of that which is involved here. This is to say that on some level we are all deeply connected to our physical earth. She has a personality. She, and I use the word deliberately because it's a conscious being, she has a feminine aspect.
Yes.
Mother Earth, we say, we don't say Father Earth, and we feel it instinctively. But if you went on Mars, you wouldn't say Mother Mars, because that is a much more masculine character of being. And so each planet has this personality, and if you grow there, you as if become a part of or an expression of that personality.
Each country also, I think, in
Each
the,
country
uh,
has
in,
its
in
own
the world.
Yes.
Russia is the motherland.
Yes. Germany's fatherland.
Germany's fatherland.
What is England?
Brexit.
What is England?
Closer to fatherland, I would think.
Yes.
Yes.
Feels like that.
Yes.
France?
Anyone know about France?
She's represented as feminine, yes.
I think feminine.
Yes. India is mother. United States is mother. Interesting. There's a difference. If you see the way the United States spirit is represented in popular imagery, you have Uncle Sam
Uncle Sam, yes.
with this top hat,
Hmm.
quite an ugly face, very harsh persona. But that's not the consciousness of the nation, which is the feminine. There is an incident that Sri Aurobindo refers to. I don't know if you're aware of this. Maybe we're digressing from the theme, but he's asked in the evening talks, what about the future of the United States? And his only response is, don't you know the three visions of, who was one of the founders? George Washington. The three visions of George Washington. And if you do your research on the internet, you'll actually find that incident described, which was narrated by him to a friend who then recorded it after his death. During the time when he was fighting for independence. One of the nights, these were Freemasons, they had a deep spiritual perspective and even development.
Most of them were Freemasons.
Most of them. And with a spiritual vision. And
Yes.
that's why the United States Constitution is something so special. That it has stood the test of time. And it was an expression of inspiration and vision. So one night he wakes up, he's in his camp, they're in the middle of a war, he goes out, he's called out somehow, he goes out, and there he has a vision of this form of a woman who addresses him as Son of the Republic. Interesting. And she says to him, this is the future you're trying to build, or this is the nation you're trying to build. And she gives him three visions of the future to come. In the first one, he is shown a cloud of darkness coming from the east across the Atlantic, and it is repelled. And this, I suppose, corresponds to the period of the First World War. Second vision, a cloud of darkness from the west, which is also repelled. And I suppose this represents the Pearl Harbor attack. The third vision he has is of darkness coming from all over the world. And it's almost as if the Republic is suffocating in the darkness. And at that moment, there's a descent of four angelic beings. They come and fight and liberate from the darkness. Sorry, it's always moving to see that image. But it represents a struggle which is yet to happen. And it will be a struggle which will represent not only for the United States but for the earth.
The mother said that America and India would lead us into the new world.
Yes. She was very keen that the United States and India should work together. And she saw an alignment of the spiritual power and the material power and wealth for the purpose of manifesting the truth. But then she said all this changed with the Vietnam War, where in America, in our vocabulary today, we will say the deep state took over. And it is the change in the balance there which will begin this shift. And we see that happening today. In fact, we are in the very midst of this change. As you know, when the last war took place with Pakistan, it was 1971, the mother had guided Indira Gandhi with specific details of how to finish the war as quickly as possible.
Yes.
And even the generals, I think we spoke of this.
Not to back
earlier.
off.
Yes, and she said not to face head-on with the Bangladesh army, but to go straight for Dhaka. And it was a strategic decision taken. They did not do anything on the border, they went straight for Dhaka, and the war was finished with the shortest time and the least casualty. And the people at the top in the army, the generals, field marshal, later he became field marshal, they were in direct touch with the mother in this matter. Many of them later came and met her. But at that time she had instructed Indira Gandhi, now immediately turn to West Pakistan and finished the problem. And Indira Gandhi, in fact, the Indian army was victorious. It had taken, I believe, 140,000 prisoners of war from the Pakistani side. And it would have completed the action if not for the fact that the United States stepped in and put pressure to stop in favor of Pakistan. And at that point, Indira Gandhi negotiated a treaty in which she gave back all these prisoners of war for nothing in return. Bhutto, in fact, had promised her, he said, give me a face-saving device, give me back the prisoners, and I promise to make peace and finish this problem. And before he could make peace, he was killed, and the Pakistani deep state took over. So at that point, mother said it was a huge mistake. As a result, India would suffer a lot. And then all this is described in the agenda. A few weeks down, she tells Supreme, he asks, well, what's happening about Pakistan? She said, oh, that's taken care of. I saw what's going to happen. It will not be through war. And then she says, the world situation will change. The US will support India instead of Pakistan. And then bit by bit, Pakistan will begin to fragment into 5 parts, and each part will want to rejoin with India. Now you see, since that time till now, this change did not take place. For the first time in the last 2 years, we see the United States openly supporting India, putting the squeeze on Pakistan to end terrorism, and cutting off all funding for the terrorism. It's as if the deep state in the US, which was working with the deep state in Pakistan, has been kind of toppled, funding cut off, power structures, strings cut. And the result is Pakistan is in such a huge squeeze that they are being forced to change. And at the same time, as you know, just a few days ago, Article 370 has been removed, and Kashmir, as a in-between state which was never fully integrated, that whole question has been dissolved. And after this, Pakistan has no reason to exist. If you look at the rationale of Pakistan, this is something we can dwell upon. How does a nation form? You can't just mark a territory and say, we will now be a new nation. The nation, like the planet, has to be an expression of a spiritual consciousness. You can't just sit in the middle of space and say, let's gather a bundle of dirt and we'll make a planet. It doesn't have a consciousness. So it is with the nation. So if you take the nation which was India, Mother India, and you cut off one arm and cut off the other arm on the other side, you don't end up getting three people. You get broken arms. Arms don't have a soul. So Pakistan doesn't have a soul, Bangladesh doesn't have a soul. How does a form exist without a soul? By creating a false soul, what we will call the ego. So Pakistan's only reason to exist is by false ego identity, because it has no soul of its own. And so the false ego identity must define itself in terms of its soul, by opposition to its soul. And its soul is not in its body. Right? So what does it do? It creates a false identity of fear or hatred towards India. That's how Pakistan holds its identity, otherwise it has nothing. As long as it can maintain this either fear or hatred to India, it keeps its sense of separateness. If you dissolve the fear or hatred, it has no reason to exist, and they start saying, well, why are we separate? And so this is what's happening. As long as Kashmir was held as the point of conflict, it had a reason to exist, and it could build its fear or hatred. Now suddenly it has nothing. And India has grown so much in economic terms, Pakistan has only grown worse. And in fact, it happened about 4 years ago, I believe, 4 or 5 years ago, that in a TV talk show, they had this open discussion. Even if Pakistan wanted to rejoin with India, would India accept us? This was the question placed. And they had a whole discussion around that. That they even discussed it shows you that somewhere inside in the psyche of Pakistan, that's always a question of what is our identity. And so the moment you've removed this, which was the only issue on which it could hold on to, Pakistan has no reason to exist, and the fragmentation of Pakistan will already, which is already internally there, will become now obvious. It will become overt. So we are at that point, what Mother spoke of in 1971 and 72, it's happening right now. It's a very significant passage. So we were coming back to the theme of the nation as a spirit, as a soul, as a consciousness. And you see, Sri Aurobindo speaks of this. He says, when nature took evolution and the integration of humanity through many levels, from the individual she formed the family unit, and then the tribal, and then other regional, and so on, ending with the nation state, and from there the last step is human unity. Having come to this point where the nation state is under formation, not yet complete, and working towards human unity, Mother said nature has dissolved or chosen to dissolve all the other levels in between, except individual, family, nation. Everything in between family and nation is being dissolved, and you see that now so obviously. But nation as a unit has a soul, has a consciousness, has a soul. In Savitri there's this line where Savitri sees the nations as beings in the higher worlds.
Yes.
You remember that? And that's part of the work still incomplete, for the nation soul to develop itself and acquire a distinctive individuality that the collective consciousness of the nation now expresses.
And Sri Aurobindo saw this 170 years ago.
Yes. 107. Yes.
So no, yeah, just to come back on the India-Pakistan conflict and the fact you said that India has a soul and Pakistan has a false ego and no soul, and that that sense of false ego was maintained by fear. And I was wondering how to put Islam in the equation, since most of the population of Pakistan was Muslim,
Yes.
and India was not. So how that plays out?
Yes. What is interesting is in the popular presentation of Islam in international affairs, it's presented as one big monolith. In fact, if you see the character of Islam and its teaching, it was primarily a nationalistic movement specific to Saudi Arabia. The mission of Prophet Muhammad was to unite all the tribes around a common identity, unify them, create this unit that became the nation. Which is why at the very heart of the Islamic formulation, the people of that space have a special value. Now, when, let's say in Bangladesh, they converted to Islam, somehow in the very teaching, they are lesser Muslims. And so if you go to Bangladesh today and make a poll, 97% of Bangladeshis trace their lineage back to Muhammad. Otherwise, you're not a true Muslim in that sense. So what happened in fact in history, once that work for that space was done and Islam spread out, Islam took its own peculiar turn in each space that it went. If you look at Iran, Persia of one time, although it has the official religion of Islam, the form of Islam is so different. You may say it's Shia versus Sunni, but it's not just that. The way people live it or practice it is so different. They are largely carrying the values of the original Persian culture. They've not lost that. With a thin veneer of Islamic forms on the surface. So to this day, the Persian, Iranian will proudly say, one wife, one God. Now this is, as an idea, it's not there in the Islamic, Quranic or any of those teachings. It is specific to the Persian value system. And many other cultural elements which have now as if been mixed into, they will call it Islamic, otherwise it's not acceptable as a practice. But so the same thing happened when Islam entered into India. First there was a strong struggle on the borders, but when they did manage to come in, the Indian Muslim is fundamentally different in outlook and largely carries the Indian character of the inclusiveness, the acceptance of multiple approaches to the divine and so on. And so it is only in the political utility of Islam that you find the conflict. If you actually cross over to Pakistan, they are Indians with a Muslim practice perhaps, but culturally still Indian. And so this is what has been experienced every time, that there has been a crossover and a mix of contact at people to people. You do not feel a difference. And there is so much affection, so much love, so much free acceptance. When there was a cricket match, they opened the borders and Indians went across. The Pakistanis would greet them, you are from India, we will not take money from you. They would just give them free food, free facilities. Just that kind of affection and love is dangerous for the identity of Pakistan, the ego of Pakistan, which is held primarily not even in the political sphere, in the military sphere, in what we have called the deep state. And so at that level, they need to constantly recreate fear or hatred, but it has never seeped down low enough to hit the common man. Except momentarily, if you are given false facts of what's happening on the other side of the border, get people riled up and upset, it stops there, but it doesn't go deeper. And so the moment you see the change taking place in the top level leadership of Pakistan, and particularly the military leadership, you'll find at the common man's level there'll be no problem at all and the integration might happen very smoothly.
How did it then become a base for terrorism?
Because it had no soul. And the military taking it over had to now continue to build fear, hatred. And so they used Islam as a vehicle to breed terrorism and as a form of what we call proxy war. They realized after 2 attempts that they could not make a head-on war. So the only way they could do was to maintain a proxy war, which was their means of maintaining identity and fear and hatred and purpose. In fact, in the Pakistani parliament, somebody made this observation just now after Article 370 was removed. They said, he's the head of the Pakistani People's Party, the PPP. He said, our party was created for the Kashmir cause. Now, which country creates an entire party to govern itself out of a cause that has nothing to do with itself and something to do with someone out there in another country? But he said that, and they believed that, and suddenly now that cause is gone. What happens to the party? The whole identity begins to crumble. So Islam is being used for the purpose of exercising this fear, hatred objective, but otherwise it has not really been, it has not had a value of its own. In the same way, partition, for the purpose of partition, they used Islam. And this was the great falsehood of partition. They said a separate religion must have a separate identity, which is not the case. It's the culture which makes the identity. And you could create religious distinctions or gender distinctions or economic distinctions. They don't make for the nation identity. And this was the falsehood there. I believe the same thing will happen much later perhaps with Bangladesh, where also some kind of an alignment will take place. What Mother spoke of was a federal structure, where all these countries now becoming so distinct in some of their population and educational and economic criteria that to have a free merging might be not so healthy, but to have some kind of alignment so that the soul of India can inhabit freely without this cutting up in a federal framework, so that we all work together as one people. That's necessary for the work that India has to do, the spiritual work for the future of the world. Sri Aurobindo had actually said, if the partition continues, India's mission may be greatly thwarted, and even that work could be postponed or prevented from fulfilling. So the larger picture we have to see is the spiritual mission that India has to fulfill, and for this the division has to go in whatever form. In the same way, the planet has its own consciousness and soul. And so we were actually linking this with that theme. So it was this resonance of the life forms with the human body which I was particularly drawing attention to. And if something in the life forms of Earth begins to die out, extinction of a species or a life form, it will reflect in the human body as a lack of support for that particular part of our consciousness. As a human being, we are the most complete individualization of Earth planetary consciousness. And so it's as if all the animals and plants out there have their corresponding, let's say, quality or power of consciousness represented and organized in us. We are literally head of family. And so if you extinguish something there, it's going to reflect inside you. If you poison something there, it's going to poison you, because we are intimately connected. And this, interestingly, nature shows us even in the physical evidence of form. So if you look at the vegetables, every vegetable, fruit, or even some of the nuts, have a form and sometimes even color, form and texture similar to some organ of the human body. Can you name a few? Walnut. Okay. The most obvious. The walnut looks like the human brain. So similar, amazingly similar. It's even got two halves. And interestingly, the two halves, if you take it as left brain and right brain, the shell of the walnut is like the skull. It goes the other way. It's not as if two halves and two halves of... It's not as if you have two halves of the walnut and two halves of the shell on the same side. It's two halves of the walnut this way, like the brain, and shell like this, and one below. Yeah. Like the cap, and then below. It's fascinating. And then the shape of the brain internally. Now look at the nutrients in the walnut. Almost entirely condensed nutrition specifically required for the brain. Amazing. You see, the brain has requirement for very specific rare metals. So rare in the sense that they're needed in such small quantities, that's why they're rare, and yet they're so critical, you remove it and your brain function drops. Or even you get some sickness. And the walnut has exactly what's needed for the brain. Find another?
Cashew for the ear.
Cashews, yes. Okay, maybe for the ear. What else? Almond. Eyes, okay. Okra?
Coconut.
Oh, coconut. Yes, coconut. What is it?
Is it not?
Yes, it is.
Well, obviously I think so.
Yes?
From inside out.
Yes.
All quality
Coconut.
that is-
So, you know, when traditionally in India, when they open the coconut, there is the fiber outside. You remove that, and then there's the hard nut, which is similar to the human skull. And then it has three marks, which are like eyes, three eyes. The third eye and the other two eyes. And the back, on the other side, they will always leave a tuft of the fiber. And that's the tuft behind the head which a Brahmin keeps. They'll never cut that off. And it's because you're literally treating the coconut as if a human head with eyes and the tuft. And then notice what happens. When you break it, inside you have the white, which will correspond in color very close to the grey matter of the brain. And then the liquid inside corresponding to the liquid inside the brain. Just as an analogy, if you see, it's quite amazing. And the coconut grows where? Not under the earth, not over ground, not in between. It's the highest. It's the highest. Literally the tree goes as high as it can and then makes the fruit up there. And today what do we have? Dwarf coconut trees, which grow at human height level. Now, here's the interesting thing. From a purely physics point of view, you know what a battery is like? Wet cell, dry cell. There's a liquid and then there are there's an electrolyte liquid and then there are two sides for the voltage which is built up. The content of the coconut water is electrolyte, pure electrolyte. You can drink it like you drink an electrolyte liquid. So the coconut literally at that height has an ability to hold a charge. Except it's not physical electricity, it is of a subtler grade of electricity, energy, life force. And the higher you go from the earth, the higher the voltage. Now if the typical voltage around the earth, voltage of the earth, planetary voltage by the way, planetary electric field, every meter that you go up is about 100 volts. Interesting, very low impedance, very high impedance, but about here you have 100 meters. From floor to here, the gap is 100 meters. Now the higher up you go, the greater the voltage differential from head of coconut tree to root. And that charge is as if accumulated in the coconut. You bring it down and you drink it. If you drink fresh coconut water, you almost feel an electric tingle in your tongue. Okay?
In the 1970s, Parichan told me that they were experimenting with the golden coconut to replace sucrose.
Yes.
And they were injecting it directly into people.
Yes. In fact, you're taught as a commando. If you're in the field and there's an injury, someone has lost blood, you don't have a blood source, you take a coconut, strain it in a cloth to remove any fibrous pieces, and you can inject it directly into your bloodstream.
Yes.
And so it tells you something amazing. You drink that, you eat that, it's going to amplify the energy in your brain. Any other fruit, vegetable? What about the gourd? Matches what? Shape of your stomach, abdomen, stomach, digestive part. You have also kidneys. Beans, kidney beans is the most obvious similarity. So similar in appearance that you actually call it kidney beans. And then if you match nutrients again, internal structure, fiber structure, they all match. So if you think of it in this way, what did nature do? Every vegetable out there, every fruit out there corresponds to something inside you physically, and just to make you conscious, even the shape. Well, actually there's more to it. Because that material expresses the quality of consciousness which corresponds to the quality of consciousness in your organ. The shape is an expression of the quality of consciousness. That's why they match. And instinctively, if you did not have your human mind to question and doubt, you will find yourself drawn vibrationally, energetically to that food which is now needed most for your body. There will be a craving which will recognize that vibrational quality. You will eat it and it will give you nourishment for the thing that's missing. So you see, even at a very physical level, human being is like the epitome of the whole expression of nature. And we are, if you can give it a very overt expression, we can say we are earth consciousness attempting to express herself in an individualized mental life. And so it's as if all of earth leans to form this human body, and all that's out there represented in us. And that's why this whole question of tinkering with things out there has consequences at a very deep level of the process of life itself and our internal life. Equally, extinction of a species represents the same thing in us.
Are there not positive aspects to scientists working with DNA?
Yes, absolutely. We can, if we align ourselves with nature's will and the spiritual influence, we can accelerate the evolutionary
Yes.
process. That's why the gift of DNA knowledge has been given to us. But everything depends on how we use it.
Yeah.
I want to also complete this discussion with the relationship we have with the animals. So plants, it was obvious, fruits, vegetables, and even plant texture, shape, tissue have similarities, but animals, they correspond qualitatively to the energy qualities within us. If you look at some of the martial arts, particularly in their specializations all over the world, and if you've seen some of these very popular martial art movies, in 30 years ago it was Liu Chia-hui who was the great Bruce Lee, these were names. So in one of the movies they showed us this monk goes and learns all the arts, he comes back with all the skills, mastery, and he faces the bad guy, and then they keep switching styles. So then he does the martial arts in the monkey style, then he switches to the snake style, then he switches to the tiger style, and then he has a particular art which he calls drunken monkey, and so he moves like that. Whoop. But think about it. Why are specialized forms of martial arts associated with animals? Because they represent a particular expression of energy, of vital energy.
Yeah.
If you look at a human being, you will find in them characteristics which correspond to certain animals, energetically. So at our physical body, we see the connection with vegetables and fruits in their shape and nutrition, but energy body, we see the connection with animals.
Yes.
So somebody has a leonine figure or character, right? Majesty, authority, or tiger has a very different feel. Somebody walks with the lumbering gait of an elephant. He leaps like a gazelle. The dancer leaps like a gazelle, we might say. And these are distinctive energy qualities expressed in each of those animals, which in the human being exist as a potential at least, and sometimes in each individual, one of these is stronger.
We spoke once about Schwarzenegger and his work to make the body
Yes.
the perfect
Right.
shape. But there was on the internet recently, I found Bruce Lee. He says, you must make every part of the body conscious.
Interesting. Yes.
Incredible.
Yes.
There is that consciousness.
Absolutely.
So back to food and its relation with nature. When nature brings a new species in, Luther Burbank was very famous for this. He could go down a row of 10,000 plum seedlings and pick out the two that would be superior.
Exactly.
Amazing. This is nature's progress.
Yes, this is collaboration between human beings and nature, for which we have to become sufficiently intuitivized, as was Luther Burbank. Do you want to expand on this, the kind of work he did? Because this is something exceptional, and to me it represents the future of farming, gardening, and collaboration with nature.
Well, there were many of them that
Yes.
I recall. One was George Washington Carver.
Mm-hmm.
Found 200 uses for the peanut.
Mm-hmm.
And he was asked once, how do you do this? And he says, everything will give up its secret if you love it enough. And of course, today we have found through the secret life of plants, the secrets of the soil, things that almost seem occult,
Yes.
but are very, very living.
Yes.
Now, Burbank was a special one because he must have had occult knowledge very deeply,
Yes.
what he could do.
But again, the key is this love. Love for
it's the
nature,
love,
love
yes,
for the plants.
Absolutely.
And if the consciousness is sufficiently intuitivized, it reveals its secret, it shows you how to use it,
Yes.
and gives you all the
Yes,
knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
And this is going to be the future. And this particular skill which we have, where with the genetics you can intervene at a very deep level, that skill must be put to this intuitive consciousness, put to the use of the intuitive consciousness and led by it. And then we will be in collaboration with nature, and we can enormously accelerate the variations and changes of species. And this is part of the intention of nature in giving us this knowledge. In the human body itself, I just saw a news item today. They have just discovered the gene which is responsible for the regrowth of a tooth. And so now with that genetic intervention, you can trigger the growth of a tooth in a rat. If you can do it in a rat, you can do it in a human being. The knowledge is there. Of course, it will be held back because they don't want it to come out too soon. The whole dentistry will change overnight if you just bring this knowledge out. All you'll need to do is inject with the CRISPR intervention of the gene, and it will trigger the growth of the new tooth. That's it. No more problems with any bad teeth. The knowledge is given to you. How will you use it now? And the same is being done also with growth of new organs, where we can grow them and replace. We touched upon it last time.
In these communities, these spiritual communities, who practice conscious aspects of intake of food, what have you seen in the people?
Inevitably, those who have this at a community level, the practice of eating food with consecration or growing their own food, and of course that means you love the food, you love the earth, you can feel in the food that they grow, first the vitality is much higher. And so the same quantum of food that you may eat will give you more energy and nourishment. And we have to distinguish these two. There's a nourishment which is in the content at a physical, biological level, but there's the vital energy which comes into the food, which is clear, pure, more intense. You need to eat less to get the same energy. If they have a spiritual content to their practice, then of course it can also lift in a spiritual way. But that varies according to communities.
Last thoughts before we take a break. The research that's now been being done on vegetables, for example, seems to be going in the wrong direction. The Japanese want to make a square tomato so it will transport more easily.
Think about it. The tomato expresses, remember, a quality of energy and vibration, which naturally becomes round. To make it square, you have to intervene in its energetic quality, and that means it will no more be tomato energetically. And what it corresponds to in your body as the tomato with the organ or function will so fundamentally change that if you eat that, it will not nourish that part which you need. That's the point we need to look at from a yoga perspective, from a spiritual insight.
Yes.
There was the second question you want. Suicide gene.
In connection with food, the suicidal seeds, how they affect the human life?
Yes. So this is a very interesting question. When we recognize that the things out there are actually corresponding to things in us, when we have introduced the suicide gene into nature, Monsanto created the gene, they insert into the seed, they sell you the seed. So the seed grows, but whatever seeds it produces, let's say it is a wheat stalk, whatever wheat it produces, if you plant them, there is a gene inside which will make it commit suicide. So it's called the suicide gene.
Could you
And the goal
elaborate
is,
a little bit about the farmers
yes, so
in the north?
the goal is to make you keep buying from them. Whereas traditionally, a farmer used to grow their own seeds, would keep a little bit for the next crop, and what happened over generations, the seeds developed their own specializations and crossbred on boundaries to create very distinct types. I mentioned last time we had 140,000 species of rice in India. Of course, now it's mostly gone. But so the introduction of suicide gene makes for monoculture because it's one company producing in mass. But on the other side, when you ingest that gene, it triggers the same suicide at a genetic level because your body gets all those things. And this is not something which is taught in your textbooks, but it is confirmed by research. If you eat an apple, your body absorbs not just the molecules of nutrition, it's also absorbing the genetic content. And this is seen in the epigenetic content of the apple, which immediately hits your bloodstream within 1 hour. In other words, apple epigenetics is in your bloodstream within 1 hour of eating an apple. Now you eat any fruit, any vegetable raw, and its epigenetic content is operating in your body within 1 hour. And if you have the suicide gene, well, its epigenetic effect is operating in your body. I don't know what it implies for cancer. But certainly at a psychological level, it triggers a similar process. So what happened in India, when they introduced the suicide gene, large-scale failures of crop would take place. So there will be one plot, they basically bribed some politicians to allow them to have test crops. So anybody, any farmer could declare this is a test crop, and they could bring in those genes. Except that there is a horizontal transfer. So if you have your rice crop, it transfers horizontally to the other crops nearby and it kills them. So your test crop continues to flourish because you buy from Monsanto, whereas these people's crop fails. And there was massive failure of crops in the whole region of Maharashtra on such a scale as not been seen in the last decade, a couple of decades. And the result was the farmers unable to pay back loans would commit suicide. And I saw the link there because here was the suicide gene reflecting in the psychological profile, tendency, behavior. That's the epigenetic content. How it functions, how it activates, and the changes it makes in your thought and behavior.
But why were they sold?
So the government had banned these genetically modified crops. But as you know, in India, politicians used to be for sale. It's changing now, but it used to be for sale. So anyone could bribe anybody and get a little loophole formed. And the loophole was you declare your crop to be test crop, you could put anything there. But hopefully these things will change. Yes.
Food as a substance is supposed to nourish your body, it's supposed to add like value and healthy function. Is there something in food that makes people want to go to war? Like where does that come from in relation to food?
Interesting question. Is there something in food that might make you want to go to war? If the food is part of nature, as nature developed it, that food will be in the energetic balance of nature. So in a forest, yes, you have struggles, but it is always in balance and held in harmony. Overall, everything is in balance. But if you have introduced in the genetic content something which breaks out of the balance, and so for example, they would bring a fish, put it in a pond, a fish from some other place, not aligned to the current species, and this fish is extremely vicious, it eats up all other fish. That fish now eaten by you will bring that element of viciousness which is in the fish into you. Mother speaks of this, a close friend of hers who was vegetarian, one day ate meat, it was chicken I think, and that night she had a dream in which she found herself hanging, being plucked and all that. So the content of the psychological experience of the being is ingested in the food that you eat. And if they are violent, aggressive types of fish which you have introduced for the purpose of rapid breeding, well, that is going to come into the human psyche also.
In the Great Lakes, They now have fish that have taken over,
Yes,
and the native fish are gone.
yes. And the same happened in Africa, in the Victoria Lake and other places. And the fish they introduced were extremely aggressive. They wiped out all the traditional balance of fish. And they're all grown there and then exported to Europe. Interesting.
Have you done any experiments like that too? Like, I mean, you've spoken about so many different experiments where here you have this suicide gene, or because, I mean, for me, I don't understand how, I mean, we're talking about the earth being a live, conscious being. We're talking about it as a mother. We're talking about it as nourishment. And definitely, okay, there are other forces at play, but what in man or what in anyone wants to go out there and harm another person and conquer, or because where does that come
The
from?
divine is not only wisdom, is not only harmony, is not only perfection, but is also strength and power. And in the evolution, all four aspects need to be developed. And in the early development of strength and power, necessarily it can take a form which is crude and coarse, not yet refined. In the same way as in the early development of wisdom, it can take on a form of knowledge which is very limited and narrow. And so as part of evolution, the aspect of strength is necessary. And because it is crude and coarse, well, we suffer with conflicts and wars. But when it awakens to its true character, then it is a force and a power which breaks obstacles and which makes possible great achievements and not breaks down into narrow conflicts. Yes.
We'll break for a few minutes and then continue with the next session. Namaste. If you have any questions, please do ask them. And if you would like to write to me and send me your questions for future series, my email is very simple, narada12@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to pass them along to Sraddhalu.